Got it. Rainy afternoon, Mayor.
Yep.
That's okay. That's all right. Sit inside and nothing today. Had some good football to watch today.
Well, we're probably going to go see a couple of friends today.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Their plans might be changing here soon, but safe to root for Michigan again today, I suppose. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. So I got to turn this volume down on this phone here. All right.
All right.
Anyway.
No one's in here yet, but I'm still going to say good morning, everyone.
Hi, everybody. If you're on here, say hello, even though we know there's no one here.
Yep. Oh, there's Jim Miller. Hey, Jim.
Oh, hey. That was the best that first time you did that, by the way. That was so funny.
Yeah. Alan Frank too. Frank says, well, this is a great way to start off our Facebook Live. Morning, Barbara. Happy 160th of Sherman occupying Atlanta.
Yep, he was first guy in there, of course. David Ireland, 137 New York. Unfortunately, he didn't stick around long because he got the death hit him soon later. Got sick. Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately, it was a good thing. So yeah. So anyway, so it's good to get back to this on a Saturday again. And because last time was Sunday, and now we're kind of trying to get back in the swing of things. Our big move is finally over, so now we can kind of settle in a little bit. Life's finally starting to slow down a little bit for us, which is pretty cool. But that's the scoop. So it's a rainy morning here, rainy almost afternoon, but it's good stuff. So what's going on with you? I kind of know, but what's happening?
Well, I think some people saw on our social media, we have an addition at our headquarters. Cat named Mosby.
Yep, he's running around here somewhere. He's right over there, actually. Yep. So the gray cat of the Confederacy is officially here. So
Barbara said, "I'm surprised you didn't name your cat Oh. Well, that would be like, I was kind of like, no way. That just, I don't know. I would get teased so much for that. And first of all, like you and I were both on the same page of wanting a gray cat to name Mosby. So that's what we did. And the gray cat came up at the shelter down the street from us. Forever Love Rescue in Gettysburg, amazing people there. They have like all kinds of cats and kittens to adopt, so that's where we got him from. And he's a very nice cat. He's very big. He's not even 5 months old, and he's gigantic for a kitten.
Yeah, I've always wanted a great cat named Mosby. It's going back years and years and years, and so that's the scoop. So we got it. So it's cool. So he's been, first night was pretty good. He's a kitten, 4 months old, but he's, like you said, he's big, so he's probably going to eat both of us someday. So we'll enjoy what we can.
Yeah. Anyway. James mentions he's all fired up for Atlanta. Yes, and that was the topic of our latest episode because of the anniversary, the 160th falling of Atlanta. We definitely wanted to cover it this year with that. So we did Peachtree Creek a few months ago, which was kind of the start, the beginning of the end of the fall of Atlanta, and then we rounded that out by talking about the Battle of Jonesboro. Oh, Jim said it looks exactly like the cat I had.
Oh yeah, no,
I remember Jim talking about that cat.
Yeah, he's definitely a nice cat, so there's no question about it. But no, the Atlanta campaign. I mean, the thing about it though, you can imagine the sigh of relief when they finally they got Hood to leave.
Yeah,
and and we talked about the primary 4 battles at different points. We haven't really done one on Battle of Atlanta with McPherson.
We did.
Did we?
Yep, that was our second or third episode. Remember that was the one with the letters.
Oh God, yeah, that was a long time. I forgot about that. We talked about the great William Shot Pouch Walker, Mary. He got 22nd of July, he didn't make it. All those you get the nickname Shot Pouch because he got shot so many times, and that was the final. It was kind of like
he was not a fan of Patrick Claiborne.
No, he was not. But no, so we've done all 4 now. This is also the Battle of Utoy Creek. There's still that one that's still out there too. But I mean, but again, if you're focusing on what led Sherman to finally get into Atlanta, right? Yeah. So on September 2nd, August 31st, when the railroad is finally cut, they were able to siphon them off, and then they took off. Confederates took off not long after that. But yeah, I think it's important because you look at the big picture, and I realize people here in the East and other places tend to focus specifically on the Eastern Theater.
Yeah.
They look at Gettysburg and Antietam is this everything, and that's fine. Don't knock yourself out with that. But I think when you look at the political impact of Atlanta, that's really was the game changer. And then we've said before, any battles after that really were kind of window dressing. And then we talked specifically about Jonesboro, even on September 1st, that second day's battle.
Yeah.
was really unnecessary because the railroad got cut on the 31st.
Yeah.
And the first day's battle was the 31st. And it was a pretty one-sided battle for the Union. I mean,
Yeah.
how your boy Howard did himself some good on this one, Mary.
Oh, he
Right?
did. Morning, MJ.
Hey,
He did, and his memoirs about this are um they're very interesting to read, especially once they occupy Atlanta, and you can kind of hear that sigh of relief that the soldiers have that after all this campaigning. You know, Howard mentions they could finally get mail, and he says there was joy, absolute joy, at finally just being able to take a rest. But yeah, Howard is like, you know, he's had success at Ezra Church. That was his first battle in charge of the Army of the Tennessee. But the one thing I noticed in researching it is you can, and I mentioned this in the episode, is you can still tell that Ghost of Chancellorsville is in his head because he talks about protecting the flanks, you know, and being, you can tell that's a nervous, like that's like his kind of twitch right there, is that like, I don't want to be exposed again like that.
No, it made him better though. I mean, we saw that with
he
Ezra.
learned from it. He learned from what happened to him. But yeah, as you said, like, you know, saw it at Ezra. Sherman's telling him, why are you like being so cautious? And now it's like, I've been here before. And it did not work out.
I mean, you look at, just speaking of Jonesboro, you look at how he set up Jonesboro. He made sure that that Preston Blair's 17th Corps is right on the flank, right?
Yeah.
Gustavus Smith right there at the end, bang. He's got Kilpatrick cavalry on the end too.
Yeah.
He's not going to get burned on his flanks again. Right? Once bitten, twice shy, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he does at this. And so when you're looking at that first day's battle, which was a complete screw up because it's an echelon attack, and of course, you know, right off the bat, you know, it all goes off the wagon because SD Lee steps off early, and we talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
And you can see how it goes. But again, he was prepared. He was. Yep. He also had 3 times as many guys.
Exactly.
But again, when you're doing an echelon attack as a Confederate, right?
Yeah.
And you're supposed to wait until basically Claiborne and Maney in the back, and then Brown move forward, and then then they all take off. And it screws the whole thing up. But again, that's what battle is. It's bad communication with across the board with that. But it's a good day for Howard, your boy Howard. It is.
Yeah, he has a very good day. I mean, Howard's one of these guys that just like, and Slocum the same too. Not, I don't think as much, but and even Kilpatrick going out west was a good thing for him too, because the thing with out west compared to the east is there's still politics, but there's less politics. And you know, say what you will about Sherman. Sherman was good at recognizing people's strengths and playing in and like being like, okay, this is who I want for my team. You know, Kilpatrick's kind of, he can be a bit trigger happy at times, but he, as we're going to see, he's going to be like the cavalry guy on the March to the Sea. And you can see Kilpatrick was a comedic relief for the people too. The one thing Howard said about him was like, his stories would always change, but we loved his happy smile and how he always cheered us up and all this other stuff. Like he was
Kilpatrick's still the only guy who had his picture taken with prostitutes publicly on the escape from Gettysburg. So you can Google it. He's sitting there on a front porch with a bunch of hookers. I don't mean Joseph Hooker, Mary. And that got published. It's a famous picture in the Civil War, and it just goes to show his cup of F's was empty. He didn't care.
He didn't care.
And you can you could have a phone with Kilpatrick, especially here in Gettysburg, because he did screw up the whole South Cavalry field thing with Farnsworth and with Willis and all those guys. But he had his good moments later, and they all did. And you take away Chancellorsville for your guy Howard, he didn't have many bad moments.
No,
but that was the one that people remember because people are.
That's the thing is that's what they remember. And like Howard is not the greatest general, but he's not the worst. He's talented though, and you know Sherman was able to see that in how he was.
He's got those rock hard abs too, Mary. God. That chiseled face.
That was a reporter that said that about the
rock hard abs was you though.
I remember when he said in the episode, instead of writing the word handsomely, he just put a picture of himself.
Just put a picture of himself. It was a blank battle.
Sherman goes, it
was a handsome battle. No, but again, that's the way it is for all these guys, and you know how it is. And I think social media is the biggest enemy. And of course, you got people like Stephen Sears, Earl Hess, Ed Barr's even
Ugh.
who no, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
they have preconceived notions of people, and it
Yes.
trickles down. It trickles in, and that's okay, whatever. You do you. But I mean, I think when you look at this battle specifically with Jonesboro, it was really, really strong. But again, and we talked about the culprit with this whole thing.
Oh,
Um,
yes. James
you know,
mentions Hood leaving Hardy, and then he's like such a
well,
great leader.
you,
I can
you,
tell
you,
the
ever
set
see
happened.
that meme there where the guys from Scooby Doo is taking off the white mask
Yep.
off for the find a few veteran,
Yep.
the villain? You do that, it's Hood in this one.
Yep.
And I know that later on with Franklin and Spring Hill probably wasn't 100% his fault, and he gets blamed for that. But you got to blame for Atlanta, okay?
Yeah.
Because when you look at Atlanta, I mean, we said in the episode, it's hard to imagine William Hardy is down at Jonesboro, and he's thinking this is going to be a minor little scrape,
Yep.
and he realized he's tangled with the entire Union Army,
Yep.
right? And the next thing you know, he's like, you know what? I'm kind of digging Atlanta. Why don't you just deal with it? I'm not going to come.
Yeah. Just fight.
And finally, after the battle, Hardy's like, F this, man. I can't do this. And so he ends up going off to the Department of Florida, North Carolina, Virginia,
Yeah.
North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida.
Yeah.
And
He's in Savannah. He's in Savannah.
He ends up taking off. But again, look, everyone has their good moments, their bad moments. But the big four battles we talked about, Peachtree, Ezra, Atlanta, and Jonesboro, that's a solid 0 for 4 for Hood.
But yeah, he's just not. And I think the thing that I looked at in this, like, or realized as I was reading the different accounts of it, is, when you go back to how Sherman feels about Hood, he's like, oh, good, we'll finally fight now, But I think on the other side of it, you have Hood, who he doesn't understand who Sherman is as a commander. He doesn't understand Sherman's subordinates and how they fight. It's almost like he can't quite wrap his mind around, what are they going to do next? Like, how are they going to fight me? Whereas I think Joseph E. Johnston was a little bit more challenging for Sherman, definitely more challenging for him. Joseph E. Johnston was able to know what Sherman was going to do, know who he was as a fighter, and commander and all that. But I think Hood was not able to figure out what Sherman was going to do and how he was going to work as a commander. And the same for his subordinates. He wasn't able to figure them out.
That shouldn't have been a surprise for Hood, though, because Sherman, with the game plan on Hood, Sherman was pretty easy. He's going to go around your flank. He's not going to hit you in the front.
Yeah.
And he did hit him in the front at Utoy. We didn't mention Utoy, but again, that was the downside of this whole thing. We didn't really mention it because that's a whole episode in just itself. Yeah. But we look at the rest of the campaign. That's what he does, right?
Yeah, and the whole Atlanta campaign is a very interesting study because you have it, leading up to Peachtree Creek. Like, the Union is not doing well. You have battles like Kennesaw and Pickett's Mill, where not good, to the point where Sherman doesn't even, mention Pickett's Mill, which we discussed in the episode we did. And then you have like this game change. The game changes when, Hood is put in charge. Johnston is removed, and you have the Battle of Peachtree Creek. You also have, major changes happening on the Union side of it too, with Burbsy dying. Like, he gets killed, and then Hooker has his little temper tantrum, and they bring Slocum back down. So, and the one thing we were talking about is, if Hooker hadn't had his little temper tantrum and took his ball and gone home, he would have been the first Union officer, that would have been him, not Slocum, going into Atlanta.
Yeah, that would have been a crowning moment for him.
Yeah, that would have been that. That's like, everything is redeemed for me now.
No, I mean, if he would have been the guy, and again, how many people besides people on this chat know that Henry Slocum is the one who went into Atlanta? No one knows, no one cares, but because he didn't take a victory lap. I mean, the dude never wore a hat, Mary.
No, that's what, I noticed
that when he had that sweet coif.
I know, you said he had the Pete Carmichael hair, right?
Yeah, the Pete Carmichael. Yeah, rest in peace, Pete. But that's the whole thing was Hooker would have gone in there and he would have made it. That would have been his crown jewel.
Yeah,
it's like Schimmelfetting, the pig man taking over, taking Charleston. Yeah. These guys don't promote it, so no one talks about it. But Hooker would have promoted that. There's no question.
Oh yeah, well, because he gets Lookout Mountain, which I think is huge for the Union, especially from a moral standpoint. And then Grant is like, this is pure romance. You could just see Hooker walking into Atlanta and say, like, call this pure romance, Grant.
Yeah, and don't forget too, Joseph Wheeler, he took off, and he left after he tried to take it. And the Confederacy And Hood didn't have any cavalry. You know who he could have used? He could have used little Mosby. That's what he could have used right
yeah,
here.
there's our cat.
All right, there he is. But he didn't have much cavalry, and so that was the other issue. Is that when you look at this Battle of Jonesboro, that's the problem. You see the mistakes again. 2020 hindsight being our benefactor, of course, is we're able to look at this through a 160 plus year looking glass. Yeah. But again, when you look at Jonesboro, how important that battle ultimately was, and how it truly was to hold those train tracks in Atlanta, it's like we talked about Reams a couple weeks ago, right? Over in Petersburg, it's a similar situation, but the Confederates were ready for that one.
Yeah,
and they went all in. Of course, you've got Lee, and here you got Hood.
Yep.
And Hood also studied under the altar of Robert E. Lee, but he also had that Lee complex thing where he felt he was as good as Lee. And when he went west, originally leading into the Battle of Chickamauga, he felt that it was kind of like when Pope came east, right? I'm the man. I got this. I studied under Lee. I'm in the Army of Northern Virginia. And then he peed down his leg.
Yeah.
And again, and then this isn't really an indictment so much of Hood personally. It was just that he wasn't ready for that moment. And he was dropped into a pretty big moment too. He was put into the start the Super Bowl the day before the game, is what that was. And that's kind of what it is.
Yeah. Speaking of Bream Station, AQ did ask, when are we going to do a Barlow episode?
We're going to do a Barlow episode right around the time of the big Cub Scout reunion. We're going to do that one. I think it's called the blue and gold celebration. No, but we're going to do one.
We are.
We're going to do one on Barlow here pretty soon.
Yeah, we have so many that we want to do episodes about, including the gallant Bowen is one we've been talking about. That's like a joke we have with our friend Leonard. That he wants one about Bowen. I wouldn't mind doing one about S.D. Lee. Speaking of the brain trust that is at the Battle of Jonesboro on the Confederate side, I was reading about him this morning, and I'm like, oh, this guy is he's bad.
You know what's so funny about Barlow? Speaking of Barlow, and I'll say not joke around with this whole thing with him, he's an interesting fellow too, because you look at those pictures of him, he looks like he's should be on Leave It to Beaver. That's just the way he looks. Yeah. No beard. Looked honest. He was a hard dude. And he was a hard guy, and a lot of his men didn't like him. And when we talked about the Battle of Spotsylvania, we talked a lot about that. He was a hard-fighting dude, and we'll do that. And to her point, though, we are going to do it on Barlow because he's a fascinating guy. There's just so many people that we still on the list. Yeah, and he's definitely on there. There's no question.
Yeah. Bill Hammond's on here. Morning, Bill. But yeah, it's and the other commander in this that is not very good is S.D. Lee. He is I like to use that analogy that you used in the episode where it's like planes, trains, and automobiles where the car is falling apart. And that is basically S.D. Lee in the Civil War.
S.D. Lee is he's an interesting guy. He is, right? And he had his good moments. I mean, remember we talked about Vicksburg. We talked about the Battle of Champion Hill. That was his great moment.
Oh, he was. Was it Chickasaw or Champion Hill?
But Champion Hill was his, in my opinion, was his best moment. I mean, it didn't work because the spoiler, Vicksburg didn't work out for the Confederacy. Yeah. But what happened was he ended up having a really good day there. But what happened was when you look at his later thing, the problem is he got sent off with Nathan Bedford Forrest. And I don't know what the hell happened there, but you have a good moment, Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. Yeah. And we haven't talked too much about that stuff because that summer of 64, the Confederates were really obsessed with trying to cut down Sherman's supply line, right? Yeah. And that's what Battle of Bryce's Crossroads is, June of 64, where they want to disrupt that. But they have some success with that. Yeah. But then he doubles down on Tupelo a month later, and he gets pantsed, right?
Sorry. Oh, I see you have a friend.
Yeah, he's going to eat my cord here. But that's what happens with him, and he claims victory for that. He says, "Oh, I don't care. I don't care what it says. That was rigged. We won, right?" Yeah. And that's what he does. And so he ends up, falling by the wayside with that. And then he ends up, going to Atlanta, and he screws up Jonesboro, and there's a lot of things he does. But we talked about this a little bit this morning when we were having coffee of his post-war activities, right? Yes. And he was a hardcore fire-eating guy. People don't realize Stephen Dill Lee, very, very, very racist, even for his time. Yeah. the white supremacy thing, and so he had a real tough time post-war. There's
Oh
no
yeah,
question.
and he was a huge champion of the lost cause, and he's like, we need to teach this in schools. I was reading his post-war,
Yeah.
like, wow.
No,
Like
he was.
Gordon, like John Brown Gordon is another one, but Stephen Dealey, I was like, holy, like, there's no shame here.
No, I know, but him and Forrest had Bryce's was good. Bryce's
Yeah.
Crossroads, and that's most people know Bryce's Crossroads. It's a famous battle, but again, it's that constant effort, which was Joseph E. Johnson's plan all
Yeah.
along when he was still in place to cut down those supply lines in Mississippi going to Atlanta to cut
Yeah.
down Sherman. And it obviously didn't work out for him, but but it wasn't really even his fault with this though, because don't forget the orders of Hood. If we get pantsed on day one at Jonesboro, you need to get your hindquarters back to Atlanta to protect my butt. And so he does, and he leaves at 1 o'clock in the morning on 9/1. And he leaves Hardee by himself. And somehow Sherman doesn't know he left, which is kind of weird. He inexplicably doesn't realize.
Sherman was closer by at that point. At some point, like, it was interesting, like how Howard did get some criticism for not just going after and annihilating Hardee, because Howard said, I had reserves and I just didn't use them. But he was just like, common sense basically was like, I didn't want to do it. And also too, the orders were just to get the railway. It was not to like wreck Hardee's army. Howard followed those orders. And I do think some of this time, sometimes there is personal stuff that factors into it. And I think Howard might have, he was very good friends with Hardee. He knew Hardee's family very well, including his one son. And I think sometimes that might factor into these battles is, it's like, well, it's not in my orders. And you know what? I know the guy and I really don't feel like going and, doing that right now.
No, of course, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing with all these things. It's easy to fall into that trap of just kind of knowing history, how it played out, and so this guy, the Monday morning quarterback thing. But in reality, I mean, was Hood's idea to pull S.D. Lee back? No, it wasn't a bad idea at all, because he had to think about the next stage about evacuating Atlanta, saving the Army of Tennessee, and to fight another day. But I think he also gave up the ghost a little bit too quickly. And this goes back, and we were saying before about the idea to replace Hood with Johnston anyway. Was that a good idea? I mean, history says no. But again, sometimes the best defense is a good offense too, right? So if you want to get Sherman, who is not going to hit you frontally, go out and get him. Go out and hit him. But again, the communication, we talked about Peachtree, that was a complete disaster. I mean, the game plan, you had guys taking to the ground on the second the gun was fired. They just, I ain't doing this. And
they were
we saw a little bit of it too, but don't forget, these guys have been fighting for a while. These are veterans of Battle of Chattanooga for the Confederates. Who just were losing men left and right.
And both sides, this whole Atlanta campaign, which has been going since May. But, my other thing that I was saying was like, Howard does get criticized, I think, by some people for not throwing in his reserves and just chasing Hardee and going after him. And he's like, no, common sense. But what I was thinking about that too, is there is a little bit of a personal element in this too. And I think like, well, it's not in the orders and I know Hardee and I really don't feel like doing like, kind of like, do I really want to, go after him? And I think there are sometimes personal elements, how if you're friends with somebody, how you might back off a little bit. I think that comes into it as well. Sometimes.
I remember we talked about Bentonville, right?
Yep.
With Sherman and against Joseph E. Johnson, when Johnson got reassigned, and he basically, that could have been a bloodletting, but they realized Lee had already gave it the old quit. So this is so silly. So I don't want to say it was a pillow fight, but Sherman let him off easy, and that's why it's unfortunate Hardee's son was killed there, because it just seemed like it was such. You want to talk about was he 17 years old? 16. So Hardee says, Dad, I want to fight. The war's almost over. He's like, okay, I'll put you in the safest place. And he puts him in a place, the one place Sherman attacks, he sent him to, and he didn't realize that the kid got killed. So that's, again, that personal element with a lot of these things really trumps a lot of this, and it gets lost on the wayside. And that's why you got to read the memoirs and you got to read the diaries.
And the letters too.
Because if you're going to read Battles and Leaders, by Bradford, for example, it's going to tell you, which is a great book if you just want to study battles, but it just the X's and O's of it. It's
Yeah.
not going to tell you the stories of things like that,
No,
right?
it's not going to tell you the personal things these guys are feeling, that how when they finally get into Atlanta, the relief that is felt, they can finally get mail again, they can finally write home, they can finally rest. And some people, I've heard some people say, like, well, why didn't Sherman like immediately start doing something? He's got to rest his army, and he knows what he needs to do, but he has to plan it. And he issues, Special Order 64. I think that was Special Order 64 a few days ago.
Yep.
And it's basically, it basically says we're going to stay here until we figure out what we're going to do. And it's pretty early on that, and again, mention Howard again, but he does say this will become known as the March to the Sea, but it was in its very early stages. And at that part, Howard, I think it's like not long after that Sherman goes to him and says, like, okay, I'm planning this thing and you're going to be part of it. You're going to be on the right wing of this, what I'm planning on doing. And it takes time to plan. Like, Sherman knows that area of the South like the back of his hand. He's been there. He's memorized what the terrain is like. But
he's been there twice.
Been there twice. We're gonna do an episode on the logistics of the March to the Sea, what the planning that went into it. And he's got to look at all these maps, census records of Georgia, and he figures out where the highest taxes, or I think it's like where the high agricultural areas based on taxes or whatever. And that's where he's like, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to do it, because this guarantees us we're going to get enough food. We'll be able to forage off the land. Contrary to popular belief, the entire state is not on fire during the March to the Sea.
No, that's all urban myth. But you mentioned Howard. Let's take a drink. I gotta give MJ a tip here. This Lancaster pumpkin beer she suggested is fantastic. Good job.
I'm having that one too.
Well done.
Good morning, Miranda.
Well done. She's a big pumpkin person. She suggests this beer for us. So thank MJ for that. If you want to give that a shot.
James has a question here. Could the Confederates have realistically transferred Price's army from west of the Mississippi? I know there was a lot of talk of it, but it felt impractical.
I mean, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? Yeah. I mean, sure, you could. And a guy like a Sterling Price, those guys would have helped. But again, the army was Sherman's army, even as they would, Sherman's army lost 10,000 men in the month of August alone in 64. Even with that, they still got 90,000 guys, right? So you look at how that would have been. And don't forget, too, when you look at 64, it was an entire machine turning all at the same time, with Grant doing Overland, getting to going here, Sherman's coming down to Atlanta. At some point, you're playing whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah, and you have Sheridan in the Shenandoah.
Right, you got Sheridan doing his thing. Speaking of that, good to see Miranda on here, by the way. If we stick a Sheridan, I think a Miranda. But again, you're taking somebody you're taking a position of strength to weakness, but you're creating a new position of weakness, because don't forget, too, Davis and those guys don't know where Sherman and don't know where Grant's going for the most part.
No.
So you have to try to hold your bases any way you could. Would it would have helped? Of course he would have helped. But again, I don't think it would have made a difference. That's the whole thing, too, is the Confederacy was doomed to fail from the beginning.
Yeah.
The only hope they really had was, they always say that, the way to win a war is it's a mathematical equation. Will times means, and one of those two equals 0, you lose.
Yeah.
Right. That's West Point, Germany stuff, right? You're not going to beat them by means. You're going to beat them by will.
Yep.
So if that will hits 0 in the North, that's how you're going to win.
Yep.
But again, it was looking good in 62 and 63. Looking real good in 63 up until Gettysburg, right?
Yeah.
In Vicksburg. But when that will started to get stronger as Atlanta fell, that was it. So that's why anything after that, it didn't matter. So you can move Price all over. You can move Lee here. You can move everybody all over the place. It doesn't matter, because the 64 election was sealed after Atlanta, and that was it.
Yeah. And you have everything is playing into everything else. You have what Sherman is going to do on the March to the Sea is going to impact Lee. It's going to impact the supplies. I mean, there's someone that argues that heard an argument once that criticized Sherman for not destroying the Augusta Iron Works. Why are you going to do that when you've already wrecked their way to get the supplies out? Like, why would you take the manpower?
Well, that was Sherman's, as an engineer, that was his brilliance, because you can make all the black powder and weapons that you want. If you have no way to deliver it, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And so instead of going in and attacking and costing yourselves men and then slowing yourself down, and that was the big thing, slowing yourself down.
Yeah.
Just take out the railroad and the roads around it so they can't deliver it.
Yeah.
And I think, we talked a lot with you about this because you're a big Sherman person when I first met you.
I still am. I still love studying him. I find myself getting, now that it's into the 160th, I find myself wanting to like read more about him now.
But I've kind of helped indoctrinate you into the whole Sherman overrated thing.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yep. Oh yeah, he is.
And so, and again, and it's not to minimize the effort he did.
No.
But his whole march to the sea was simply to get to a Savannah to get resupplies
in the back door.
In the back door. Oh yeah, and then get resupplied in Savannah, begin to move north to meet over at Grant over in Virginia. That's all that was.
Well, even Sherman said, "I don't know what the big deal about this march to the sea is." Like, he's kind of like, "Why is there songs? This was a moving of my supply base."
Right, but again, a lot of the diaries, Mary Chestnut, they look at Sherman, and again, a big reason today why it's a big deal is because of Margaret Mitchell. It is. Where it paints the story, of Scarlett O'Hara and Red Butler and all this stuff and Gone with the Wind, right?
Yep.
Where he's this like Cloverfield, he's this monster coming that nobody can see, but they know he's coming, and he's going to attack you with fire, right? Yep. And that's stuck, and a lot of it's very overplayed. But again, all he wanted to do was change base. He wanted to go right. He wanted to go from Atlanta to Savannah to resupply, and he wanted to live off the land. That's why the Battle of Nashville made no sense, but they didn't know that at the time. But he's able to live off the land and get there. But it was a huge feat on his part, because he's not going to go stumbling through Georgia without knowing the land. That's to your point we said a little while ago, because he knew the terrain, he knew where to go because he had the maps, he had the census maps. Yeah. That's the brilliance of William Sherman. It's not as a fighter. No. He's not take it to a sports analogy, which we tend to do. Yeah. He's not a good coach. He's a good GM. And that's what he was. Yeah. Grant was a good coach.
Yeah. And that's exactly pretty much what Howard says about him. Like Sherman is this, like, God, he could plan so well, but when it came to the execution, it was just not there. And that's why, like, everybody always talks about Sherman and Grant being best friends. But if you read somebody, for instance, Howard saw it as being Thomas and Sherman in the Western theater, that the two needed each other to work off, because Thomas would be kind of the one to say, like, well, I think we need to back off a little. That's what he told him after Kennesaw, because Sherman's like, oh, we didn't lose that many. And Thomas is like, if we keep having Kennesaw Mountains, we're not going to have an army left by the time we get to Atlanta. We've got to take a different kind of strategy. And I mean, Thomas is a very different general than him. He's also a very different general than what Grant is. But when it came down to the two of them, someone like Howard saw Thomas as being the better general overall when it came down to him and Sherman. Like, he just said Thomas was like one of the best they had.
No, Thomas was, and he gets hit a little bit for being overcautious. But again, why wouldn't you be? But that's who he was. But again, he dies not long after the war, which is why it robs American history of really appreciating George Thomas, right? Yeah, is a lot of these dudes, the Chamberlains of the world, right?
They get to write.
The Grants of the world, they get to write. Sherman gets to write. They get to tell their story. Thomas, he tells his wife to clear my history cache.
He's like, burn it.
He says, burn all my papers. And so we don't get his opinions. You can judge by, better done is better than well said, is what people always say. But sometimes the well said needs to be there, because you can appreciate more of what he did, specifically at Battle of Chattanooga with him, right?
Oh yeah. You can see what his subordinates and what the people around him are saying about him. He's like, this guy is good. And Caleb brings up a point. He's like, seems like a lot in the North didn't want to give Thomas credit, seeing as he was a Virginian. That's absolutely true during the Civil War. Lincoln doesn't trust him, Grant doesn't trust him, and Sherman doesn't trust him, because it's that whole he could flip at any moment, and Lincoln was known to refer to him as the Virginian. And I mean, that's really, I get it, but at the same time, it's very unfair, because who knows what more Thomas might have been able to do. But I think he was bitter over that too. I mean, his sisters turned his picture to the wall. That's how you unfriend somebody in the 19th century. And Thomas isn't even buried in Virginia. He's buried in New York State.
Imagine spending your eternity in New York. Ew.
Ugh. Well, that's what
Anyway,
David Ireland is.
I know. Well, but the thing but you're right though about Thomas though, because even when he's holding Nashville,
yeah.
Grant himself, along with Blackjack Logan, are being sent west from Virginia because
Yeah.
they think he's going to sit there and say, "Oh, John Bell Hood, right this way." They're going to let. They don't trust him, and finally, because he's not attacking because it's snowing and it's crappy and they're on Broadway and they're drinking. Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
But they delay that fight. Finally, thanks to troops from the USCT and some others,
Yeah.
he's able to fight Hood, win the battle of Nashville, and then Grant's like, I suppose. I mean, they made it. They were traveling. They were on their way.
Oh, and they were like determined to get him. And then Thomas is sitting there like, the weather's bad. I can't attack. What don't you understand about this? And Thomas is kind of like, you're not here. I am. I will attack when the weather is better. But right now the weather's very bad. So I can't.
It's really amazing. And also that, and I'm telling you, this is probably why he wanted his papers burned. I bet you he was pissed at all this.
Oh yeah.
And he had comments specifically about Lincoln and Halleck and Stanton and Grant and Sherman and all the people. Yeah. Probably like, what do I have to do, to prove myself? I bet you, and that's where it sucks they burned that, because there's so much history that we're denied that didn't get published. And again, it's none of our business theoretically between a husband and wife, their messages they talk about. But again, what he would have said might have filled in so many gaps between Grant and Sherman, especially, and especially the cabinet, and especially Lincoln and Stanton. And
oh, big time. And I think, you look at how some of these guys write to their wives. The wives are the confidants. Meade was like that. Howard was like that. They are telling them stuff that is not in the memoirs. Like, it's not written in Howard's memoirs that he was, at one point, there was a few weeks in July after the Battle of Gettysburg, he was going to take over the Second Corps. He told his wife Elizabeth that. And then all of a sudden it changed. All of a sudden he's going to be shipped out west. They're not going to do the reorg that they wanted to do. But that's what he told his wife. It's not in his memoirs. You're not going to know that if, Howard has a big bonfire and burns all his letters. He didn't. He kept all his letters because that was also his source for how he's going to write his memoirs as well.
Yeah.
But some stuff he doesn't put in them. Now the worst thing he says in his letters is he calls Hood stupid. That's like,
well, I mean,
he's a stupid fellow. Like, that's like
he's a stupid fellow.
But I was Thomas. And if you look at how McClellan wrote, like, those letters were never meant for public consumption. And we have them highly entertaining.
Well, that's the thing too, is everybody has written or said something to somebody that they really hope no one overhears, and they really hope no one writes it down, right?
Yep.
And you see moments like this. Specifically Gettysburg, Richard Ewell to Campbell Brown right here, right? Or about Lee. Is there anybody in Lee's army who can write a discernible order?
Yep.
Right? Things that do get written down, that do get published later, which kind of fills in the gaps in certain communication things. But there's so much missing, unfortunately, and it leaves us to speculate and surmise what these people are talking about. And that's why we do history, because it's most of it's gray. Most of it, you have to fill in the, I don't mean Confederate area, I mean gray, like gray area.
It's
right?
like, because people vague book it. James mentions the Dahlgren raid papers.
Oh, well, the thing, that's one of the greatest what ifs, one of the greatest mysteries is Ulrich Dahlgren's letters, because, and you think about the storm that created, and there are people who we know who think that the Dahlgren letters directly led to the assassination of Lincoln, right? And it's not hard to follow the dots to that. Again, it's you're speculating.
Yeah.
Dahlgren's letters, for people who didn't listen to our episode on Dahlgren, who don't study Ulrich Dahlgren, he was killed outside in Virginia, and on his person had a letter which explained that his job was to assassinate Jefferson Davis and the cabinet. Now, again, how the hell are you going to do that? It's like the old South Park episode, steel underpants plus question mark equals profit. Okay, great. How are you going to take a basically a small regiment of cavalry into Richmond, which is pretty well defended, and go kill the cabinet? But that's what the letter allegedly said. It ended up in a big deal in Richmond, and it led to a lot of the germ warfare stuff. And some people think that's what spurred Booth to kill Lincoln. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that, but again, people, some smart people do. But again,
part of history.
But that's what you get with these letters when you study this. You know?
Yeah, and that's why that, like, you know, Frank says this is I love this. He said Thomas would be the person that keeps his social media private. People like McClellan would be posting at every hour his thoughts.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, he'd be one of those guys who has 20 posts a day on Facebook, you know, and then versus the other ones who once in a while.
Thomas would post a picture of his cat,
and he'd lurk on it. He'd be one of those guys who reads everything but doesn't post, like my brother-in-law, like Adam, right? My sister's husband.
Yeah.
But that's but again, but that's the thing too, is that when you look at this, you have the people who talk, and that's the hard part about this. You have to discern the people who would just glorify themselves, right? Like Longstreet in his memoirs, like Grant, like Sherman. Again, it doesn't, no knock on them, but they're telling their superlatives.
Yeah.
Versus the people like the Wainwrights of the world, who write their stuff, who don't intend it to be published, who is more where the meat is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like the thing I find, you know, I love reading the letters that were written, because you can learn so much from them that is not going to be in a memoir. And I mean, McClellan's letters, say what you will about them, they're highly entertaining. They're fascinating to read, like most of the letters are. Lane mentions that he just finished a book on Josiah Gorgas and CSA Ordnance Bureau. After the Chattanooga disaster, the CSA Ordnance almost completely rearmed the Army of Tennessee by spring of '64. And I did ask Jim Miller, because he's a lot like Bjorn, he knows all of the books. I asked him about Thomas bios in the chat, and he said he recommends he's got two: Thomas Benson Bobrick's Master of War, and Brian Steele Willis, George Henry Thomas, As True as Steel. Yep. Frank, is there any autobiography where the person is self-critical? No.
No, there's really not. I mean, unfortunately, but when you look at some of these, the ones who aren't designed to be published are my favorites. I love Wainwright's diary, The Artillerist, because he's so brutally honest. And it wasn't, and someone in his family found all his letters and his notes, because he kept a notebook, whatever he did. And they said, we need some money, we'll publish him. He's dead, who cares, right? And so they did that. And if you read his diary, it's fascinating, because he's very open against his commanders, against people, even his own army. And he tells the best story. If you're for the Gettysburg people, the first day of Gettysburg, he tells it the most vivid story by far. And he tells it he tells why they held at the seminary, which I think is a great story. You know, where they're told to fall back to the Cemetery Hill, but he gets the orders from a German, probably an 11th Corps guy.
Yeah.
And the guy's accent's so strong, he hears seminary instead of cemetery. He turns around at Herbst Woods and sees the seminary. He goes, well, I guess that's where we need to go. So they put their artillery at the top of the hill, which fights off guys like Scales. It slows down Perrin. Yeah. And they fall ass backwards into defending the escape of the 1st, who broke first, and the 11th back to Cemetery Hill by an accent.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool about history, is how close you come, and how it's sometimes fate determines these things by some officer or some messenger who's got an accent. And Wainwright says, I don't know what the hell he's saying. It sounds like seminary to me. There's a seminary right here.
Yep.
And that's what's cool about studying this stuff, is because there's so many things like that. You study history, and people think that it's black and white. It's dates, it's places, it's names. No, it's not. It's gray area and interpretation. And that's why no one's right and no one's wrong. And people on social media bitch and complain and whine about beavers and all the stupid crap they do on social media. But there's so much gray area where it's how you interpret it. It doesn't mean you're wrong or right. It means how you interpret it. Yeah. And you could read the same book by 10 different authors on the same subject, or different books.
Yeah, same subject.
In 10 different opinions, because that's what makes history great. Why we do it.
Yep. Yeah, it's how you interpret it. It's like, and also when you're reading those books, look at not just what are their sources, but what sources have they left out. Stephen Sears is a big one for that, with Order 191 and the Battle of Antietam. John Gentili's on here. He's our cat godfather now. He said there was an interesting series on the History Channel, and they had ancestors of Dahlgren investigating it. We watched that. It was really good. Yeah, if you guys can find that, it's very, very interesting. I'm just reading some of these other comments here. Lane mentions the book he read was Plowshares into Swords. And then Bill Etzkorn's on here. We saw him last weekend, and it's awesome.
Bill Etzkorn, the man legend. Him and his BMI group, and they were pertaining. They were part of a New Hampshire regiment over at Spangler, and we went over there and joined them and watched them do their thing. And that they do fun. Such great. That was a great time, and we're going to be heading down to Cedar Creek with them here next month. It's next month in October. But they do good work. It was a lot of fun to do.
I got to talk with Cindy and Maria. I love them. They're awesome. It was my first time ever talking to Maria, meeting her in person. She's such a sweetheart. She's fun to talk to.
There are so many cool people in this field that when you get to meet and get to talk, you have different backgrounds, different beliefs. And you get and what's great about it is everyone comes together around this one subject of the Civil War. And you could be you could be a Billy Yank or a Johnny Reb, but you still find that common ground. And that's what's cool about it. Some of our friends, we were with a friend of ours who was a ranger a couple of days ago who's as gray as you're going to get. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
No question. Who instructed me to get you a Cadillac for some reason.
He's like, get that woman a Cadillac.
Right. But he's someone who, despite being from Mississippi, he can tell the whole story. He gets it, right? And a lot of people do. And that's what's great about it is you can be, and I have a lot of friends from northern people who are very pro-Confederate, right? For different reasons. And so you can find that common ground with everybody, which is kind of neat, Yeah.
And Bill also mentions some of the Dahlgren participants were BMI agents and scouts, which is that's interesting too. I'm also I'm reading on the other side of it. I'm reading a biography that was written in 1944 about Mosby, and it is so good. I'm so fascinated with him. He's one of my favorite Confederates to study, and just how the author says Mosby, I'm paraphrasing, but Mosby, he realized that he was in people's heads and keeping them awake at night, not because he was killing people, but because he was just messing with them, Mosby's not like a cold-blooded killer or whatever. He would capture you and then be like, okay, you can go now. I was talking to our former neighbor in Plymouth last night because we still talk to them. They're awesome people. And he's very into history. He's very much a Lincoln guy. We gave him a Lincoln statue, a little one that sits on his desk. And he was found out the cat's name, and his wife Emily was like, you need to call him about this. So I was telling him about Mosby, and I said, oh, he's involved with Grant's campaign. He's what would be a scallywag at the end of after the Civil War, and he'd never heard of him before. And what Randy said to me, our former neighbor, is we need to know who these guys are more. We don't talk about these guys enough, whether no matter what side they're on. But he's like, why is a Mosby not known more?
That was that. I mean, again, people don't study this stuff like people in this chat do, and I get it. And that's totally.
But he spent all last night on the computer reading about Mosby.
Yeah, and that's what's cool about it though is the Civil War field is such a unique niche. It's cool because people get it. Either you get it or you don't. It's like anything else, right? But that's fine. But again, when you look at these people, if you're and this is the thing too is you have to get out of that partisan thing. If you're a true historian, okay, you got to remember there's two teams on the field. If you're from the South, you better study the North. If you're from the North, you better study the South without that automatic agita of traitors versus, tyrants, right? Yeah. You have to be able to study it because how the hell are you going to study something by studying one half of the story?
Yeah. And yes, some of it might make you, or it will, and it should make you uncomfortable. There's parts of the Civil War that it's uncomfortable to read. And that's how history is. I'm listening to Gelzo's biography that he wrote about Lee. I'm really enjoying it. I really like how he's telling the story. He tells us one thing where Lee always wore a colonel's jacket or whatever. And there's a few different reasons why he might have done that. We don't know why, but one of the reasons was because Lee never wanted to be seen as having, resigned his commission just to become a general. The other one was the in the regular US Army, he only got to being a colonel. He was never a general in the regular US Army. He was only a general in the Confederate Army. But his book is like, and I remember when his book came out, all the criticism it got, all this other stuff. And then I'm like, well, I have to listen to this or read it or whatever. And I like it. It's really good.
Yeah.
I want to read another link. I want to read another Lee biography, because I want to see, what other people have to say about him. And I know you've read Douglas Southall Freeman, which is a complete hero worship, right?
I mean, it is. I mean, he's clearly somebody who fell in love with the subject, and it's not a indictment of Freeman.
No.
I mean, it's what he is. That's who
Yeah.
he chose to write about, and that's totally cool.
Yeah.
But again, you
it
have
still
to,
has a place in the history when we're talking about and studying General Lee. Freeman has
right,
a place
but Freeman, and the thing about it's not a total ball wash either. Okay,
No.
he does talk about the flaws. He talks about Cheat Mountain. He talks about Gettysburg. He talks about, I mean, there's a recent book that came out by a guy from West Point who unfortunately wrote who went the other way.
Yeah.
With basically painting a broad brush, kind of labeling anybody who's ever been to the South as a bad person.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's not right either. And
No.
that's not. But again, that's why you read different things, because you can't, you read one specific thing and you think, okay, well, this is the way it is. And I get it. Not everyone reads as much as everybody in this chat does. I mean, because why the hell would they? They're normals. We're not normal.
No.
Right. And so that's how it goes. But again, some of the most pro-Confederate people I know are Northerners.
Yep.
Right. And I get it. I do. Especially in the Boston area, which is that rebel mentality, which goes back generations from where I'm from, right? But at the same point, if you're in the South, you better look and realize that it's more than just the tariff act that why this war happened. You have to be able to open your own horizons too. Yeah. But again, the people I've talked to for the most part, and you've talked to as well, they get it. They see both sides of it, and people see both sides of the same coin. And they realize of why it happened and how it all went and how the impacts are today. But you shouldn't feel dirty for studying that aside, because
you shouldn't ever be made to feel bad for studying anybody. And yes, I take a lot of whatever for studying Howard. I took a lot when I studied Sherman as well. And I still do like Sherman, but I've kind of shifted my focus onto a guy that's not talked about as much, that doesn't have the voice in history that Sherman has. But Frank, we're not normal. Darren, truer words have not been spoken.
Tell me about. I was a town kook for years. When they dedicated the Civil War Monument in my own old town on Cape Cod, they called me to be the guy to come for the newspaper, because I was the only guy who knew anything about it, and the only one stupid enough to wear the outfit to go to the ceremony, and I did it, right? But that's how. But again, what's great about this? Everybody. It's kind of like when you go to a foreign country and everyone speaks some different language, and you hear someone speak English.
Yeah.
You could have nothing in common with them whatsoever, but you hear the English and you gravitate to them. That's what the Civil War world is. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. The smartest people I know in history are Civil War people, because they get it.
Oh my God. I had a great discussion with Maria last Sunday about, Richmond and all that. And MJ makes a good point here. She said some don't want to learn the other side because they're afraid of something resonating with them. So everybody knows I love to study Patrick Cleburne as well on the Confederate side. But the thing that resonates for me with him is that he and I are both immigrants. And that part of his story, him finding his home, he's born in Ireland. Everyone knows that. Initially settles in Ohio, and then he moves to Arkansas and he finds his home. And that was, that's why he's fighting. It's his home. He's accepted. He's on a debating society. He's in a chess club. He's in Freemasons. He's involved in politics, and he finds his home there.
I don't know what this Freemason thing is. That sounds made up to me.
But I just my whole thing is I relate to that feeling of finding home as an immigrant.
Yeah.
It's and Caleb says Cleburne is one of the best ever. He absolutely.
You look at the fact that when you look at the big picture and you take away the blue versus the gray foolishness crap, Cleburne and the guy we named the cat after, are about as two as two of the best you're gonna get, right?
Yep.
And Claiborne probably by all accounts should have fought for Ohio, right?
Yep.
If he didn't feel that Helena, Arkansas was going to be more of a home for him.
Well, he was just asked to go there because those pharmacists were like, "We want to put a store here."
Right.
Go
And
run it for us.
Mosby was a guy who felt when the war was over, they did their best, but now it's time to reconciliate. Ended up being U.S. Grant's campaign manager, and being someone who is very pro union, and so that's the thing is they did their thing, and when you look at, I think people look at the Confederate cavalry, and they paint with a broad brush, okay. And they assume everybody's Bloody Bill Anderson, who wasn't even in the Confederate cavalry, by the way, not for nothing, but he was part of his own personal hit squad, who was a flat out murderer. He was, right? He was just a killer who enjoyed killing. But a lot of these guys, John Hunt Morgan, for example, John Mosby, their job was to, like we say, do Beetlejuice things. Just cause problems, cause issues. But again, both Morgan and Mosby, they'd catch you, slap you on the ass, literally. For Mosby, right? And then they'd send you on your way. They'd parole you. They weren't mad. I hate to, I'm saying here, the only time there was really executions done was because of Sheridan outside of Fort Royal, right?
Yeah, because Sheridan, he went at that. He's like, because it was Grant who said,
and so you have to look at every situation individually. And I'm as pro blue as you're going to get. I'm as union as you're going to come. But I'm going to look at some of these guys, and I can appreciate the other side.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is people tend to look, and we say this all the time, people tend to look at these people like they do their sports teams, right? I'm a Red Sox guy. I hate the Yankees. This person's a Laker fan. They hate the Celtics. So there's that wall, and they will not look across the wall because they realize that if they do, they might find something they appreciate about these people and understand. But I don't know any other way to study history than that. And therein lies the great dilemma, Mary.
Yeah,
is you have to be able to take that leap of faith and study the other side. I've read Gordon's memoirs, and I've read a lot of this stuff, and you read it and you go, oh my God. But you know something? You're learning from it because it gives you an idea of who these people were. You learn about their opinion, guys with Colquitt, right? And guys like Stone and Brown, and all these Georgians, but you don't agree with it, but I'm like, okay, this is where they're coming from.
Yeah, this is why they're writing this. And Miranda makes a great point. We were talking about this earlier when we were having coffee. Their lives didn't end in 1865. And I think it's more important than ever that when we're looking at the Civil War, you can't just focus on those 4 years and what those guys did, and the women as well. You've got to look at before, and especially after. You've got to look at a guy like S.D. Lee and see what is he doing after the war versus a guy like Mosby. And also, what is Howard doing? Howard's doing the Freedmen's Bureau. He's all this stuff and having a real tough time with it. But, looking at someone like, what is Hancock doing after the war as well? Like, what are their careers and why? And and you can see kind of how the war shapes them.
Right. But you can't whitewash it either, though. You can't sit there and say, well, because you look at some of these guys, therefore, I'm going to ignore what Alexander Stevens said.
Exactly.
Right?
You have to still study that.
I'm going to ignore Edmund Ruffin. I'm going to ignore Jubal Early. I'm going to ignore. I mean, you have to accept the smelly parts. I accept the fact that Lincoln put the Maryland Congress in jail. I get that. Okay, I understand why he did it, and it's if you look at that whole tyrant thing, it plays. Yes,
you can see why, and that's why you have to. You're going to have to take a step back and look at why do they think this? And Jim Miller.
But that doesn't mean everything they did was bad.
Exactly.
And there's too much polarization, like it is in modern day politics. You sit there and say, well, this guy is awful. He did this, so everything's bad. This guy's. I like what this guy did, so everything is good.
Yeah.
You can have. You can have your great grandfather lived in Virginia, fought as a militia member in the 1st Virginia. Okay, fine. Yeah. That doesn't mean you justify everything the Confederacy did, right? Either.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of shitty things that happened. Specifically, right. But right here at Gettysburg, people don't like to talk about the fact that Lee was gathering free blacks and sending back to slavery.
Oh, they do not.
They don't want to talk about that, right? But that's an acceptance you have to have. Doesn't make you a bad person for whatever. But I mean,
Yeah,
again, you can't deny it happened.
exactly.
You have to look at the full thing and be open to everything and take the good, the bad, the ugly. It's the
Yeah.
only way you learn. It's the only way.
Yeah, and it's the only way, like, finding out how these guys felt after the war is it shows how the war shaped them. Jim Miller says he tries to study as many different angles: military, civilian, north, south, east, west, male, female, like politicians, black, white, Native Americans, US. And we know Jim, he studies it all. Like Jim is like a wealth of knowledge, and he's got that
He
really
does.
cool Twitter account where post the diaries, and like
Right.
so fun when he's on our round tables and he's like, I have that book, and he literally reaches for it.
Oh yeah, you can sit there and say, well, there's a book in 1858 that was written about this. Oh, well, this
You're
one.
lucky.
No, Jim's awesome.
It's not that. It's not that.
No, but he's
He
kind of
has
like
done
that.
that. He's an awesome
but,
guy.
for real though, is that that's how you know you're studying at a high level when you can look across the line and you can learn something and you can take something out of it, and it doesn't, you don't automatically hate this guy because of the color uniform they wore. Now, at the same point, I don't sit there and look at the northern side and sit there it's all soft serve and sunshine either.
Yeah.
It's because it's not. But that's the way it is though.
Sheridan. Yeah.
Well, no, but there's a lot of it though.
There's so much of it. There's so much of it. Jen mentions Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Great movie, by the way. It is. That's a very good movie.
That's definitely a good
I
movie.
love that movie.
But my old Civil War round table back in Cape Cod, who I was the youngest by about 50 years in this group. I told you the average age was deceased in this group. That's how it was. And they were very pro-union. And of course, why wouldn't they be? They're all Cape Codders, never even leave the friggin' peninsula. But they would sit there and say, anything that was positive about this. Mosby would say, well, he's a Confederate, he's bad. Right. That's the mentality you're fighting a lot of the cases. Or anything in the South, anything. I mean, look, Sherman's no picnic if you're a Southerner. I get it. Yeah. But I will caution those people in the Georgia area that he did not do as much as the people think he did.
The whole state is not on fire.
Right. And I'll tell you before, I'll say it again. What Sheridan did in the Valley is way worse. Way worse. But again, it's the Margaret Mitchell, it's the Gone with the Wind, it's that mentality that pushes the narrative. And if you say it enough times, people are going to believe it, and it's true.
Yep. Right? Oh, James just said, like, nobody mentions Jefferson C. Davis. Oh, I can't stand him.
We talk about him. We talk about Ebenezer with him.
But I do want to learn more about him, but he's up there with Sheridan for the two people I really, really dislike on the Union side. Jefferson C. Davis is like, why is he even in command? Killed Bull Nelson. It's just, and the whole Ebenezer Creek thing, which Sherman tried to he's like, oh, it's not that bad. It's like,
I'll tell you, I have this, I say this with nothing to base it on, nothing. I think the fact his name was Jefferson Davis was a big reason why they gave more power, because they thought it was funny.
Yeah. Oh, I think I do too. Yeah.
I think somebody somewhere thought it was very ironic. So, and that they just kept pushing him along, because he's up there with the true incompetence. He really, really is.
Oh yeah.
And there's no question. Now he does well with his 14th Corps at Jonesboro. See why I bring it back now, Mary? See what we did? Right?
Frank just said justice for Bull Nelson.
Yeah, Bull Nelson. But he does a good job, because he's got guys like Absalom Baird, William Carlin, and those guys. So he does a good job at Jonesboro fighting with David Stanley's 4th Corps.
Yeah.
So he does have his good moments too. So I'm not trying to say he's some joke who just putting in. It's not a Joseph Davis Gettysburg situation, right? But I think it's a situation where I think he got an opportunity. I just think so. I think because I think it's kind of funny.
And it was a joke. Well, someone was joking around about that in one of the letters, and it was either Sherman or Howard was joking around about it to their wives. Like, they were like, yeah, seriously, we have a guy named Jefferson Davis, so we always have to put the C in there just so. And it was
well, who's that actor? He's like Michael J. Jordan or something. He's an actor.
Yeah.
But they put the middle initial in for that same reason, which is always kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, like Michael Keaton is actually Michael Douglas, and now he's going to go by Michael Keaton Douglas.
Is he really?
Yep. Michael Keaton's real name is Michael Douglas.
That I knew. We got to go see Beetlejuice, by the way. That's playing at the Majestic here in town. We're going to see that tomorrow, maybe.
Yep. MJ brings up something really interesting about Hancock. He's viewed as the hero at Gettysburg, but his own men of the Second Corps would write to higher ups, including Lincoln, concerning with his Southern sympathies.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I think that's why I honestly think that's why Hancock clashed with Doubleday. Is there's all and Gelzo talks about that in his latest book about Gettysburg, which is really good. Just how those politics are factoring in, and you can even see it factoring into some of the stuff between Howard and Hancock, because there was like, I mean, the whole thing with the fight at East Cemetery Hill is obviously it's blown out of proportion. They did not argue on there. Howard did not lose his mind when Hancock was like, I have, dad likes me better kind of thing. And who knows what happened. There's so many different stories about it. Oh, good morning, Lisa.
Oh, hey.
But
I mean, that whole thing. I mean, if there's ever a more nothing burger story, I mean, look, there's a million stories at Gettysburg specifically. Yeah. Okay, here we go, Gettysburg again, right? But that's true. That story is the stupidest thing. The only disagreement, the only one they had was Howard said that we agree that I would control east of Baltimore Pike and he'd have west. And Hancock said, no, that didn't happen. That's the only disagreement they really, really had. But that's kind of how it played itself out. But again, who the hell knows? But Samuel Carroll had to come over to bail out. Say it.
Yeah.
But after Von Gilza took off, right?
Shocker.
Yeah, but that's the thing. But again, there was so much post-war stuff to be the guy, and I'm not sure how much Hancock appreciated not being listed by Congress as one of the heroes of Gettysburg.
Oh, he did not like it.
Right?
He wrote Howard about that, and he was not happy. And I also think he got wind that Howard was going to be placed in charge of the Second Corps while Hancock was recuperating, and I think that kind of. I mean, I get it from his side. He's like, ooh, who's this guy coming in here? But let's face it, Howard would not have fit in the Second Corps at all. Gibbon, for one, did not like him. So Howard going out west was the best thing that ever happened to him and possibly the Second Corps as well.
Winfield Scott Hancock, pound for pound, the best general in the Union Army. Yeah. But again, that's the thing though is a lot of these stories come out. I mean,
MJ said Hancock was pissed. Bjorn's on here. He said, "What are we talking about? Gettysburg." Oh, Bjorn, we also just did an episode about Jonesboro. So if you have any books you can recommend around that as well. Frank,
let me jump in. By the way, I don't want to get in front of Bjorn, but Decision in the West by Albert Castell is the book I use a lot for this one. It doesn't have specifically about Jonesboro, but it has a whole bunch of stuff. That's the book. If you're going to read about Jonesboro, Decision in the West by Albert E. Castell, that's the book to read.
Yeah.
I stand back in the glory of Bjorn, but that's what I say.
Yep. And Frank went to see him last week when he was in Chicago, so that's cool. And I know Frank said earlier in the comments that he had a copy of OO's biography, which is pretty cool as well. But yeah, Bjorn, Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, they do awesome social media like Facebook Lives with authors. Great selection of books there, and they are a major sponsor here for our trivia nights when we give away books and stuff as well.
No, Bjorn's the man, no question about that. Frank went to see him again last week.
Yep.
Wow. No, we're gonna get to Chicago soon and go see Bjorn. That is a cool little story. We talk about that a million times.
Bjorn says fully recommends Decision in the West.
That's a good one because a Battle of Jonesboro is not the easiest research. Admittedly, it's not because there's not a lot.
No,
that one is a good job breaking down the troop movements. It talks specifically about the talk about Hood not coming to bail out Hardee. So a lot of the stuff from the podcast episode came from that book, but it's a lot of it's a good one. It's not just Jonesboro. It talks about Utoy. It talks about Ezra. It talks about all the battles of Atlanta that any good young studies should do. Mary should read about the Battle of Atlanta.
Yes, Caleb says he needs to get up to see Bjorn. He's only like 2 hours away. And Jim just getting Jefferson C. Davis says there's one book about him, Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis, Civil War General by Major Bruce V. Soanes, and he completely agrees with us about it. But yeah, and Frank's saying it's a worthwhile trip to go see Bjorn, and I think he would second that.
I've said this before. I remember I got out of that Uber that day and they dropped me off and I looked around. I'm like, this cannot be it. It was like a warehouse. I'm like, oh God. And so to knock on the door and then here comes Bjorn. Let's be in there. It's a cool little place. And you can go and we talk a lot about his site, but he's got a great Facebook page too.
Oh yes. The Facebook Lives he does with authors are great.
He had Colby on from Unholy Traffic, so we're going to have him on as an episode pretty soon about the slave trade in the 1850s and 60s, which is a fascinating study. That book by Robert Colby, it breaks down the slavery situation going into the war from basically a financial situation, from like you're reading the Dow Jones
Yeah.
futures, and the economic impact it had. It's of all the books I've read about that subject, it's the one that puts it in dollars and cents and makes
Yeah.
it a math equation, and it's a fascinating read. So he was on with Bjorn a few weeks ago. We had fun with that, watching that. But we'll have him on and we'll talk
Yeah.
about that. But if you haven't read Unholy Traffic, it is a tough read. Not gonna lie, it just is. Okay, but it's a necessary one to understand the financial aspect of this, right? About how much shutting down the expected shutting down of slavery in the South, what that did for them and how the impact was, and it's a dirty read, but it's a necessary.
It's necessary. It's very necessary. Bjorn mentions too David Powell, which we have his books about Chickamauga, which are must reads for studying that campaign. He's working on his Atlanta campaign now. And he's still 3 volumes short of Jonesboro. So that's going to probably become the work on the Atlanta campaign, is what Dave Powell is writing.
Yeah, no, Powell does good work. Obviously, he really, really does. But again, the Atlanta campaign is, I mean, for all the publicity that the Vicksburg campaign does, and justifiably so, or the Overland campaign does, or the Gettysburg campaign does, or the Maryland campaign does, the Atlanta campaign really is the big one. And it doesn't have a lot of sexy battles. There's no Gettysburg. There's no Atlanta. I mean, Kennesaw is about as good as you're going to get, but it's a lot of getting close and then going around you, falling back, right?
Yeah.
But
I like the people that are part of it, like the Granberry and Lucius Polk, not the bishop, but Lucius, his nephew, who's another one I want to study more about. I don't know why. I just like Claiborne's guys are the ones I want to learn about, because they you have Claiborne, who is an amazing commander, but I don't think he's Claiborne without Granberry and Govan and Polk and Lowry, right? Lowry was with him too.
No, there's a lot of good ones they had. I mean, but even guys like George Maney.
Oh yeah,
right?
Maney too, yeah.
Other guys like that. John C. Brown.
Says, don't tell me Resaca isn't sexy. What's wrong with you, Terry?
Oh, Resaca is very sexy. There's no question.
He also says Robert D. Jenkins is writing a lot about Atlanta, and he's good too. And he says Atlanta is dreadfully understudied.
And obviously Pickett's Mill is a panty dropper. No question about that. That's the sexiest you're going to get too. But again, you're going to read some of these battles, and there are very few actual. I mean, Ringgold's a good one, and I consider that part of the Atlanta campaign.
Yeah. It's the very end of.
I mean, Dallas.
And it's the beginning of Atlanta.
Cold Farm is another great one, right? Another shitty moment for Hood, by the way, is Cold Farm. Just saying.
Yep.
By the way, but there's a lot, but you don't have a South Mountain to Antietam. You don't have a second, Winchester to Gettysburg. You don't have that. You don't have that. Like you do in these other campaigns. But it's a great visit too. Is you can go down that highway from Atlanta to Chattanooga, battlefield all the way. You're following the same road that Sherman came if you take that highway.
That's how we found Jonesboro. And Caleb, this is really nice what you said regarding the Jonesboro episode. Let me just quickly say thank you for covering stuff that isn't mainstream. That's kind of the theme with Civil War Records Club, and it's definitely needed and appreciated. Well, thank you, Caleb.
No, thanks, Caleb. Appreciate it. But I think you have to understand Jonesboro, because Jonesboro, kind of like Reams, but on the opposite side, Jonesboro allowed the Union to finally break that Macon and Western Railroad. That really was the end of the game for Atlanta. And to understand why Hood vacated the dance floor of Atlanta, because it's like, wait a second, why the hell would he leave? It was a poor 22,000 citizens.
Yeah.
All that manufacturing, all that the weaponry and all the supplies they had. Why would he just walk away? Well, it's because the Union cut the Macon Western Railroad, and he had no way to supply it anymore.
Yeah.
Instead of getting sieged like Vicksburg did, or like Petersburg was getting, he decided to leave and fight another day, which led to Spring Hill and Franklin and that Nashville, that whole thing. But without Jonesboro, it doesn't happen. So if you're going to understand Atlanta, you have to study Jonesboro. So I'm glad those are kind words. We appreciate it. But again, it's a necessary evil.
Yeah.
And every big battle or every big event is a culmination of a tremor. Every volcano has tremors before. Every earthquake has tremors.
Yeah.
You have to study the tremors to understand the volcano.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why, like, it's so important to study, like you can say like the Atlanta campaign is successful. Obviously it is because they get Atlanta. But you've got to drill down at those individual battles to see how bad some of it was for Sherman, the Kennesaws, the Pickett's Mills, and all that. And the one thing I did think, and then just Pickett's Mill made me think of this, but the one thing I think maybe why Howard might also not have thrown in his reserves is he got pants pretty hard by Claiborne, specifically Hiram Granbury. And I wonder if he was like, you know what? I don't want to go down that road again.
Well, these guys had reputations. I mean, they did.
Like Granbury at that point, his F's are all gone. Like, sad story. His wife has died. And he's back in the army because that's all he now knows. That's all he has. And Granbury to me is understudied and underrated. He is such a hard fighter. And I don't think you have the Pat Claiborne we know today without Hiram Granbury, and vice versa. They are very, they go together. So
well, I mean, the one who really, I mean, if you look at Hiram Grant, if you look at Pat Claiborne, I mean, his partner in crime was Thomas Hinman.
Yes.
Right. And you look at the fact
that short, 5'2" or something like that.
Yeah. He was the one who you go to the bar with, who fights everybody, who throws a bottle at someone for no reason. Right. And he misses out on Jonesboro because he's riding on his horse one day and he gets his eye scratched by a branch and he misses the battle. It's like, oh, really? Sounds like he should be playing soccer, if you ask me, Mary. Right. But he was someone who was a big instrumental part of that Claiborne story because he was the one who got him agitated.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Bjorn said, was it important that General Ewell didn't take that hill on August 31st, 1864? OO took the hill minutes before Hardee. Good day for OO.
Yeah. I mean, when you look with that Flint River, right, specifically.
Yeah.
And that was a situation. People could say, well, didn't realize there's only 2,500 guys there. He probably should have rolled right through, but he didn't know. But the fact that they were able to get over the Anthony's Bridge and get to Flint River and then set up those defenses and get across is very, very underappreciated by the Civil War mainstream.
Yeah.
Because you look at Howard, oh my God, he ran from Chancellorsville, blah, 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 blah. But they don't realize how impactful that was and how many lives he saved.
Yeah.
Because if he doesn't get across that river and they have to get across that river, the battle is brutal as it was, especially the Confederacy. It would have been a lot worse to the North. Once you have control of the river and those bridges, the road's a lot easier. Yeah,
exactly. And Jim Miller just said he was not short, merely vertically challenged. And I just said, we both understand that plight. And Caleb said, has anyone else noticed Sherman's annoyance and frustration with his cavalry during the Atlanta campaign?
Well, we talked about that.
Yes,
we talked specifically about George Stoneman. So
Howard was frustrated with Stoneman.
Well, I mean Stoneman, who had his moments, but he also is the guy who Chancellorsville, right? He decided to ride west, young man, and never came back. But when you look at specifically at the Atlanta campaign, he's going out. Don't forget the battle of Dalton, who no one studies, right? He's going out to that area. But again, instead of fighting to protect the trains, he decides to take a milk run to Andersonville.
Yeah.
Because he's going to bag. He wants to, and I commend him for that, for trying. But he gets his entire division, including himself, bagged by Joseph Wheeler, and he's done. I mean, he ends up getting paroled not long later and goes.
They trade him for Govan, right?
Right, he gets traded for Govan. But when you look at the cavalry in that area, the supply lines of Sherman, we talked about some of the other ones a little while ago. Bryce's Crossroads, in Mobile, they're all designed to try to get to knock out the rail lines. This is one where he's going to protect them. But he let the cavalry, who was let down. There was really no real cavalry for him at this point, especially at Jonesboro. He really didn't have any. He had Kilpatrick, who was great on that southern flank because he was protecting Anthony's Bridge. He was able to kind of, at least initially, he was going to hold back Claiborne's guys with Maney and Brown. But really, they besides kind of covering the flanks, they didn't do much. But I absolutely was frustrated at the cavalry.
Oh,
he was.
Yeah,
when Kilpatrick's your best guy, that says something. And I like Kilpatrick. I do. But again, He's a loose cannon.
Oh, he is. But he was exactly who Sherman needed during the March to the Sea. Bjorn recommends Sherman's Horseman by David Evans from 1996 to talk about the cavalry. There was that really funny story that you can tell Howard he likes Kilpatrick. Kilpatrick is entertainment for him. But he tells that one story where he says Kilpatrick was in a really bad mood one day, and Howard says to him to try and cheer him up. He's like, "Oh, I heard a joke about you recently," and Kilpatrick's like, "Really?" And he's like, Howard just says, "Well, Sherman tells me you're renaming the towns, and you took Barnwell yesterday, and you changed the name to Burnwell." He said Kilpatrick started laughing. He's like, "You turned it to Burn. You changed the name to Burnwell. You're rewriting the map for all these towns and stuff."
Yeah, I mean, he had a sense of humor. Like I said before, he was a guy who took the picture with those prostitutes after the Gettysburg campaign. He had his moments. He did pretty well on the retreat. He did a good job over in Hagerstown, for example.
Yep.
And so, but he wasn't a disaster. He wasn't brutal.
No,
anything,
no,
but
he
again,
was a loose cannon.
but he was,
sure.
but Stoneman was a disaster. He was. And
Yeah.
that, I mean, again, you can look at his career for the most part. And there is some awful Union cavalry.
Oh,
right.
What's his face? Shaggy.
That one's bad, but you
I can't remember his name now.
But you look at but it overshadows the really good people who did well, especially here in the East in Gettysburg, like Custer, who did. Dave McMurtry Gregg was probably the most underrated in the Union cavalry. There's no question.
Yeah.
But again, that's the thing, and you read these underlying stories about Brinkerhoff Ridge and East Cavalry Field here, and then Ream Station, which he also did very well with. But he also went against Wade Hampton, who was probably, maybe, arguably the best that Confederate had overall for what he did. Yeah. I still think Mosby was, for what he did, was the best, but they had different roles.
Yeah, Mosby was like, he's a ranger.
Mosby was just designed to frustrate you,
to
destroy railroad, burn stuff, get in and out. Versus Hampton was on the flanks of the infantry who was going to fight. He was going to hit, kind of like Jeb or any of these guys, Jenkins or any of these dudes, Beverly Robertson. Those type of mentality people. So there are different types of people, but yeah, that's true.
And the one thing I want to mention before we jump off regarding Jonesboro and the Flint River is the reason Howard gets there is mainly because of Estes, who won the Medal of Honor for going over the bridge with his guys. And, it was like Howard went to Kilpatrick and was like, "So we need water. Do you know anybody?" And Kilpatrick's like, "I've got a guy." And of course, Kilpatrick has a guy, and it's Estes. And his name was it Llewellyn Estes? George Llewellyn?
Something like that. Something like those weird names.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly Google it so I can tell people what it is. Anyway, he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. It's Llewellyn Garish Estes. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. He earned the Medal of Honor in, I think it was 1894. He finally got it for what he does here at Jonesboro, because he manages. So Howard is sitting, like, when he arrives at his initial position, there's no water, and he's like maybe 4 or 5 miles from Jonesboro. Howard says it's 6. Another source I read says it's 3. So it's debated. But Estes is Kilpatrick's guy, and Estes he's like, "Yes, I can do this. Oh, you want me to rebuild the bridge too? By all means, I will rebuild the bridge for you as well." And that's how Howard is able to get there. He is a lot closer than he thought. Howard totally says, like, "I thought I was going to have a bigger battle. This guy bails me out big time." And Howard writes a glowing report of what Estes does, earns the Medal of Honor. And again, he's Estes. No one, I mean, I never heard his name.
No, there's a lot of people like that who don't get the credit they do. And there's a lot of people who do, and there's a lot of people on both sides who do, who get credit, who get too much credit, don't get enough credit. Right. And, we mentioned Union Cavalry, and we even mentioned John Buford. He's another one, right?
Yeah. That's James Hardin Buford. Good ground.
But he gets killed early, and that kind of takes away a lot of what he did.
Yeah.
But I look at McMurtry Gregg. I think he's the best one because he's consistent all the way through.
Yeah.
He's one of the true saviors of Gettysburg no one studies. no
Yeah.
question. And he does things later on, especially outside of Petersburg.
Yeah, I like him, and I like Kilpatrick as well. I find Kilpatrick very fascinating. I think there's a lot of unnecessary hatred towards Kilpatrick. I get it, he's not the greatest, but he does really well in the March to the Sea, and he's like, you can tell he's like entertainment for these guys on the Atlanta campaign and the March to the Sea and the Carolinas. Like he is just, he comes in and he's got these great stories. They're often like lies, like he embellishes big time, but he gets the guys laughing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, he's getting the guys laughing.
Mhm.
And then there's the story with him and Sherman, and like Kilpatrick's like, how do you want me to let you know I'm there? And Sherman's like, well, burn a bridge or something.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating study to study this. And the Navy is the one that no one studies. Cavalry is probably second.
Yeah.
Artillery is probably third. And it's the infantry gets a lot of credit. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just people tend to study. But when you look at these things from top to bottom, from the corps level down to the company level, or even down to the battalion level, it's a fascinating way to study. So, all right, we should get ready to jump up. It's 11:30, Mary.
We should. Yes, we have things
That was our time.
Yeah,
it's pouring out here right now, by the way.
Ugh. Sucks. Oh.
Yeah, but it's okay. So we got some stuff coming. So we have some episodes we're going to do on the March to the Sea coming up pretty soon.
And the Shenandoah. We're probably going to do an episode on the Shenandoah Valley as well as the March to the Sea, because those, again, 1/60th of that happening. And for Shenandoah, doesn't get talked about enough just how bad that is.
Yeah, Shenandoah was a thing. We got to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of these things we're going to talk about, but we got some fun stuff coming. We got book clubs we're going to be announcing pretty soon with some people. We're going to be doing a live here pretty soon. I mean, we're doing what do you call it? A round table here pretty soon. So we'll send emails out for those when we pick a date. So all right. So any final words from you?
Well, just from Jim Miller, he says, you can't hate Kilpatrick too much because we would not have Anderson Cooper. And I definitely agree with that.
That's true.
Anderson Cooper is a descendant of Kilpatrick's. And Bjorn just said, is Darren hinting at a Navy episode? Yes, we probably will be doing.
There's some stuff
we need to do a Navy episode.
We're talking at Civil War Breakfast Club, world headquarters here. We talk about these different ideas, but there's a lot of things we want to do. We've kind of shorted the Navy, admittedly. We've talked about brown waters, blue waters here and there, but we haven't talked a lot specifically about the Foots or the Farragut's of the world. Although we did the one on with David Rose, remember?
Yep.
We did it on the Liverpool and the blockade runners. That was a good one. We
Alexander Rose, not David Rose.
Oh, did I say David Rose? Oh my God, who David? Alexander. We've been watching Schitt's Creek again, so obviously that's where that comes from.
I love Schitt's Creek.
All right. So off we go. So everybody have a great episode. Have a great episode. Have a great weekend. So hopefully it's dry where you are. Hopefully it's not raining here. It kind of screws the day up. It's raining. But anyway, off we go. All right. So any last thing you want to say, Mary?
Thanks for all your support, everybody, and also especially you, Darren, for being an awesome host with this podcast, and thanks to everyone who comes on here for our silly little thing we do on here on YouTube, and for your support for the last 135 episodes.
135. Can you imagine that? That's unbelievable. That's a long time. 4 years and going. Holy moly. All right, guys. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe. Go Boston College football, Mary. We're going undefeated this year. National champions. We're going up. We beat Florida State. The next stop is the parade. Off we go. Probably not. Anyway. All right. We'll talk to you guys soon.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.